Today, we read from the beginning of John's Gospel. It is called the Prologue. You will recognize the first few verses as we have been using them as our Advent litany leading up to Christmas. Verse 5 inspired our theme of "The light shines in the darkness." We read from John chapter 1, verses 1 to 18. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things came into being through him, and without him not one thing came into being. What has come into being in him was life, and the life was the light of all people. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not overcome it. There was a man sent from God whose name was John. He came as a witness to testify to the light, so that all might believe through him. He himself was not the light, but he came to testify to the light. The true light, which enlightens everyone, was coming into the world. He was in the world, and the world came into being through him, yet the world did not know him. He came to what was his own, and his own people did not accept him. But to all who received him, who believed in his name, he gave power to become children of God, who were born not of blood, or of the will of the flesh, or of the will of man, but of God. And the Word became flesh and lived among us, and we have seen his glory, the glory as of a Father's only Son, full of grace and truth. John testified to him and cried out, "This was he of whom I said, 'He who comes after me ranks ahead of me, because he was before me.' From his fullness we have all received grace upon grace. The law indeed was given through Moses. Grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. No one has ever seen God. It is God, the only Son, who is close to the Father's heart, who has made him known." The Gospel of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
Grace to you and peace. Amen. I once watched a brief documentary about the team of researchers that work the obituaries desk of the New York Times. One of the curiosities detailed was how they work to be prepared for the deaths of notable people, even if they're unexpected. These writers have created thousands of obituaries for those who have not yet passed away. But they're written from the standpoint of, what if that were to happen today? Because of this preparation, the Times was able to publish a detailed obituary at 3:30 a.m. this morning. Upon the news that the Archbishop Emeritus of the Anglican Church in South Africa, a Nobel laureate for his promotion of nonviolent protest against the apartheid government, Desmond Tutu, has died. When I awoke early this morning to finally put to words for this sermon that I've been imagining for a couple of weeks now, the notice of this obituary was awaiting notification on my phone. Tutu's life's work has been an inspiration to millions and a witness to God's ongoing mission in the world. Perhaps now in his death, he might continue to be a witness for us who are gathered today to celebrate God's continual inbreaking of light into the darkness. As the government attempted to remake and rebuild South Africa as it tore down its apartheid apparatus, Desmond Tutu was tasked with leading its Truth and Reconciliation Commission, recognizing that forgiveness was the only pathway forward through the deep sea of injustices that had been drowning his home for so long, Tutu used the promise of true amnesty to heal the wounds of the past. Though he was awarded the Nobel Prize in 1984 based solely on the promise of peace embedded in his preaching at the time, it was in this practice of reconciliation that his country experienced the fulfillment of the promise. This is what the prophets throughout all of history have been proclaiming. Peace is coming. Jeremiah promised that for those who call upon the Lord, they would be returned from exile. Ezekiel announced that not even death could stop God from reanimating those who believed that they were without life. Isaiah declared that the yoke of burden and the oppressor's rod would be broken once a child arrived. And who would be called the Prince of Peace? And again, Isaiah assured us that even the mountains would sing as this new prince would lead us back in peace. Mary knew of this promise and found herself the bearer of a future king whose rule would be unlike any other and stand in stark contrast to the mighty and powerful of the world's making. Her magnificent song testified to the promise that this world would be turned upside down as a result. The mighty will fall, and the lowly will be lifted up. The rich will be sent away empty, while the hungry are filled. Injustice will cease, and all the generations will be blessed. This is the promise that Desmond Tutu clung to in his life and in his work. At first, he followed after his father to become a school teacher, but he soon quit in protest of the laws that unjustly created such poor standards and conditions for black children. He found his voice in the Anglican Church, and from the pulpit, he echoed the ancient prophets, proclaiming not just the theoretical, but something that was actually happening. We can trust that God is here, Tutu's preaching emphasized, to a divided world, and we know which side God is on. One of his most poignant exhortations was this: if you are neutral in situations of injustice, you have chosen the side of the oppressor. If an elephant has its foot on the tail of a mouse, and you say that you are neutral, the mouse will not appreciate your neutrality. Neutrality is a deceptive temptation in a world made weary by division. How often do we convince ourselves that the peaceful approach is only found by not taking a side? To each his own, we might say. But to not stand up to the elephant is to abdicate God's vision for the world and to cede the inheritance that the children of God have been given. There is no peace without justice. But the event we began celebrating on Friday continues still today. It's especially into an unjust world that God has come. God has broken into a world where division is the modus operandi. The powerful use division to their advantage, fooling us to believe that taking sides is the problem. The elephant wants us to be fair and to ignore that without the help of another, a mouse can never move the scale in the other direction. We will never make progress in the face of the many challenges facing us today if we favor neutrality for the sake of peace. And peace will never be found. But the Prince of Peace has come into the world to shine a light on a very different path. Today's evangelist declares that in Jesus, God has spoken a new reality into existence. And God has chosen sides. God has chosen the lowly, the hungry, those who are out of their leagues, those who work the third shifts, those who are without a home, and those who don't know what tomorrow holds. God has chosen those who can't say no to the thing that is killing them, those who have been left behind, and those who have lost their way. God has chosen those who are ignored, those who have been told that they're the wrong color, and those who've been taught to deny their very selves. This is the side that God has chosen, and this is where God's light is shining. And in case you're wondering, God has chosen you. You are not going to walk in the darkness any longer. You are going to walk in the light, because you're going to walk with the lowly, with the hungry, with the lonely, with the stranger, with the unaccepted, with the forgotten. You are going to walk on the side where the light is shining. This is the pathway to peace, so step out of the darkness. This is the promise that God has made, and this is the promise that has been fulfilled today. When the staff of the New York Times prepares their files on you, what sort of content will they be able to draw upon? Where was the light shining in your life? And will it be clear which side you were on? I had the chance to hear Bishop Tutu preach once in person. Just prior to his work on the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, he came to be a visiting professor at the Candler School of Theology at Emory University. My brother was graduating with an MBA from Emory that spring, and I was there for the baccalaureate service when Tutu was the guest preacher. I don't have much recall of the content of his sermon, but I do remember being inspired as I listened to him. I was a child of the 80s when the struggle against apartheid was front and center in the news, even though in my predominantly privileged white upbringing and the worldview it created. And even though I was years away from becoming one myself, I knew I was listening to a preacher who had changed the world with his words. Through Desmond Tutu, God was able to shine the light on a small mouse whose tail was caught under the weight of an elephant. And that light made the elephant move. What was promised has been fulfilled. Thanks be to God. Amen.